It's only a kick, a jump, a block. It's only a serve. It's only a tackle, a run. It's only for the fans. After all, it's only pressure. You got this. Adidas.
Welcome to the College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. Here are your co-hosts, Doug Lesmerises and Shehan Jeyarajah. And we're ready for this. Doug and Shehan, it's time to make picks on the playoff show about the playoff. It's the playoff, and we're picking the playoff. TCU, Michigan, Ohio State, Georgia. Shehan Jeyarajah and I will declare our official selections on this podcast, which is what we are here to do. But first, Shehan, this is just podcasting 101. You make predictions because then later you can do a show about what your predictions were. So before the season started, I think we did like spring football, maybe summer ones. But then as the season started, we said, here are the 4 teams we think are going to make the playoff. You got 2 right. I got 1 right. We both said Bama number 1. We both said Ohio State number 2. I had Clemson 3. You had Georgia 3. And we both had Utah 4. As we sit here now, how do you reflect on those selections? Do you think you did a pretty good job? Or where do you think oh, man, I wish, Mr. Texas, should you have seen TCU coming?
No, I definitely should not have seen TCU coming. I don't think anybody saw TCU coming. I don't think Sonny Dykes saw TCU coming, to be frank. So you know what? Look, that's just one of those that you look back. It's like Cincinnati last year. You're just like, well, that's a thing that happened. Good for them. They 100% deserved it. But there's no reason anybody could have seen TCU making the college football playoff. If there was a single person, like maybe even TCU fans, that picked TCU to go to the playoff, I want to meet you. I want to ask what was going through your head, because I'm friends with so many TCU fans, and not a single one of them would have potentially said that TCU could have made the college football playoff heading into the year. So that's a wash. Whatever. We'll live with it. I think the other part of this, so I have up actually our CBS predictions, and there are 7 of us who made picks heading into the year. 6 of us had Alabama as the number 1 team in the country. 5 of us had Alabama winning the national championship. What a failure. I don't think that I'm trying to think back to all of the Nick Saban teams at Alabama. I'm not saying that this is the worst one, but this has to be the biggest failure of the group. It is unbelievable for them. Obviously, they finished number 5, but I think that even that number 5 is a little bit misleading in the context of what they ended up being this year. It's just a very disappointing team. Obviously, even with the 2 losses they had that were close, they had other games that they easily could have lost against much inferior opponents. This was such a weird year for Alabama. And then you look at the other 2 teams, Georgia, I think they've established themselves as one of these teams that's going to stick around for a very long time. And Ohio State is kind of a backdoor addition to the field. But I like the logic. I like the idea of where I was going. I think, look, if Utah doesn't lose to Florida in the first week of the season, maybe they have a chance to maybe even make the field over Ohio State. Unfortunately, they're not able to do that. So I think overall, we were all wrong about Alabama. I feel okay about where I was about everybody else. I did say all offseason long that Alabama and Ohio State are on a collision course. And if that is not the case, if these are not the 2 teams that are playing in the national championship game, I think that is an indictment of whoever it is who doesn't make it. And I think that there are reasons to be concerned about both of those programs right now in the context of them being Alabama and Ohio State, of course. And so weird year, fun year. And I don't feel so bad about what I did in the preseason relative to some other years.
This continues a version of the discussion that we've had multiple times that we'll continue to have in the offseason. But I do think maybe the default setting for college football has now changed, because I think when you look at our picks, and as you said, a lot of people's picks, Bama 1, Ohio State 2, that was not necessarily reflective of last year. That was still the default of the playoff era, the default of this era of college football. And I didn't pick Georgia or Michigan to make the playoff after they both made the playoff last year, because I viewed what Georgia and Michigan did last year. I wouldn't say a blip would not be the right word, but I thought it would be difficult for both of them to run it back in a way where there's no margin for error. You lose a goofy game here or there. You've got Alabama and Ohio State in your way in some form, and you're just going to fall a little bit short. I didn't think Georgia and Michigan would fall off a cliff necessarily, though I did pick Michigan to lose 3 regular season games. And they both did it. And the teams that actually stepped back, Bama was the team that stepped back. And Ohio State was the team that struggled to try to hang on, but did in the end and might win a national championship. But I think if you viewed, okay, well, Georgia won the national title last year, but still Bama's kind of the default pick. Okay, Michigan beat Ohio State last year, but Ohio State's still the default pick. I think when we all make our picks for 2023, I think it will be a wider range of selections, which is good for the sport because there will be some people who will say, oh, okay, well, Bama had a weird year. They're going to be back. But a lot of people will be like, nope, it's not Bama anymore. Okay, well, Georgia will make third straight time for the Buckeyes. Okay, well, who really is the best team in the Big Ten right now? It always has been Ohio State, the default. Every year, at Cleveland.com, we run the preseason Big Ten poll. Every year it's Ohio State. I don't think that's the default anymore. Some people will still pick Ohio State, but some people are absolutely going to pick Michigan. They've won it 2 years in a row. How do you view Clemson now? We've talked about the passing of the torch and that kind of thing, but I think just figuring out who's going to be in the playoff, we're going to have a wider range of teams to choose from because, again, the whole reason we started this podcast, actually we started it because it was going to be a 12-team playoff. I got a little bit of delay. I was like, we're going to go off the air before we get a 12-team playoff. Now we have a 12-team playoff, so we're good. We're just making money hand over fist. It's beautiful. Well, we're alive. We're still here. So that because the 12, but also there was this stronghold, these 4 teams that had kind of a death grip on these playoff spots. And I think Michigan and Georgia, Shehan, doing it for a second consecutive year for each of them has officially loosened the grips that everybody else had on this. And there's still like a tier 1 and tier 2 in college football, but it's been shuffled a little bit. And we saw what USC did in year 1 of Lincoln Riley. A lot of people are going to pick them to make the playoff next year. It's just going to get more. The predictions are going to get more interesting and more wrong. And thinking about TCU, the one person I thought in all this was like, did that guy pick TCU? It was kind of a big thing in the preseason when Desmond Howard made his playoff picks because they were so unusual. And I was like, I think he picked TCU.
No, he picked Baylor. He
picked Baylor and Texas A&M, which is as close as you can get. He picked 2 Texas schools. Neither of them made it. A different Texas school made it. He also picked Baylor. He also picked, which I mentioned, he also picked Pitt, but he also picked Michigan. So in the end, he got as many teams in the playoff correct as I did. I got 1. He got 1. Congratulations to Desmond Howard. I don't know, Baylor. I don't know. I didn't pick anybody from Texas. So I was like, if he picked TC, like Sonny Dykes, I believe in Sonny Dykes.
I truly mean it. I don't think that a single fan of TCU picked TCU to make the playoff in the preseason. I like it wasn't even like a possibility. The optimistic TCU fans were like, we're gonna go 8-4. It's gonna be a lot of fun, and we're gonna figure things out a little bit. And then they became the first team in the round robin era to finish the Big 12 season undefeated. It had never happened before. It's just crazy stuff. And look, I think that you're right. One thing, and we'll have a whole off season to talk a little bit more about this, but we've seen these recruiting Death Stars kind of come to the forefront, and that's Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia. I really don't even think there's a fourth at this point. And they have accumulated talent through recruiting in a way that nobody else has been able to match. But one thing I'm very curious about is now we have the transfer portal, now we have NIL, and I think we're starting to see a loosening of that grip. Now, these 3 programs, I think, still have more talent than everybody else by a good margin, but I think you also see them have a little bit less consistency. You see some of their depth transferring. You see some of these guys, one thing that I've pointed to a lot is at Alabama, we don't see them have these elite defensive lines anymore because you have Georgia and also Texas A&M coming in and stealing some of these best defensive linemen who used to maybe go to Alabama. So there's a lot of factors, even though we still have this consolidation, that I think are loosening up college football a little bit. And, I think it's really good for the sport. Look, we have obviously the number 2 and number 3, probably 247 talent composite teams in college football in Georgia and Ohio State, but I believe Michigan is 15 and TCU's 34. I don't think this is going to be a one-time occurrence. I think we're going to start seeing more of these teams start to stand up. And by the way, we're going to also get into a 12-team playoff in the next couple of years that I think will create more opportunities for, Texas A&M makes the playoff as the 10 seed and gets beat by a much worse on paper 6 seed or something like that, right? And I think this is going to be really good for the sports.
You look at what Sonny Dykes did for TCU in year one, and picking TCU to make the playoff, would it be any stranger if a year from now, Shehan, somebody was picking Matt Rule in Nebraska to make the playoff, or Luke Fickell in Wisconsin, or Kenny Dillingham and Arizona State? Like, you can run through like all the other, well, I don't know. It seems like a good hire, but I mean, it's going to take a little time. And it's like, nope, just win a bunch of close games, have a couple skill guys, have a plan, get a little luck, be tough as all get out, right? And you can be here. So I do think that's a good reminder. I think Cincinnati and TCU. Cincinnati, a year ago, I had like Cincinnati fifth. It was like you could see the path. Are they going to quite get there? I don't know. TCU, again, is out of nowhere. Good for the sport. Good for the sport. Good for the sport. Good for the sport. Disruption's here. Generally, that's good. I think a little structure to the disruption isn't terrible, but I think we're in a good spot. I think we're headed to a good spot, and everybody knows what this 12-team playoff would have been this year. So I think we're in a fun, exciting place. And if we're no longer in a world where everybody in the world picks Bama to win the national title, good. Let's have some variety to what we're doing here. Okay, enough stalling. When we come back, TCU versus Michigan, who we picking? Then after that, we'll do Ohio State, Georgia on the College Football Survivor Show.
Don't miss the College Football Survivor Show bonus episode this week. Available only on Apple Podcasts.
I do not expect challenging the interior of this Georgia defensive line to go well for Ohio State, and I think that Jalen Carter is the reason why.
I think Ohio State should throw it about 75% of the time in this game and just seed that ground. Just going back and rewatching a lot of Georgia, just the times when Jalen Carter gets singled up on an interior offensive lineman, and I'm just yelling, why did you do that to him? Help him! Help that man! And so I was asking a bunch of the Georgia defenders on Tuesday, just sort of superlatives about this defense. Who's the fastest guy? Who's the smartest guy? Who's the strongest guy? And I was like, the strongest guy. And everybody was like, do you know who we are? It's Jalen Carter. And I was like, I know, but no one cares what I think. I want you to say it. I asked Chris Smith, and he's like, it was like, he just blows. It's like, I know what he does, but I just need a quote. Can you just say a quote? And the quotes from his teammates are just like a wrinkled brow. And like, if you watch us for 3 plays, you have your answer. He's just there. And like every single time. And I just think, again, Ohio State's going to have a plan for him. And the plan might be avoid him.
Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts for exclusive College Survivor Show bonus episodes.
With threats to our nation waiting around every corner, adaptability is more important than ever. When conditions change without notice, quick strategic thinking is crucial. And with obstacles consistently impending, determination is essential in overcoming them. It's this willingness, decisiveness, and resilience that sets Marines apart. With our fighting spirit, we don't just fight battles, we win them. Marines are the constant our nation counts on to fight the unknown. And through adaptable problem solving, we do just that. Learn more at Marines.com.
All right, Doug and Shehan are back. And I know at CBS Sports, this is hard. I always say I like to wait till the end of bowl week to make a pick. I'm gonna push myself to do it a little earlier in the week. I do think you're allowed to change your mind. I don't view it as flip-flopping. I view it as like you gather more and more information. And as you gather more information, I hope you are open-minded in any aspect of life. That I used to think this, and then I gathered more information, and now I think this. I don't think that's flip-flopping. I think that's being normal. But we're going to make our picks now. I know you immediately off the bat at CBS Sports had to make playoff picks basically as soon as the playoff was announced. And I know you got very bold with TCU Michigan. As we start talking about this game, I will say it just, even now that we're into the week, I think this is a bad matchup for TCU. I have the kind of team in my head that, to me, TCU could beat. And it's almost USC, maybe, right? That like a team that's more talented.
It's basically Texas. It's like Texas plus. It's turbo Texas, right? A more talented team that makes mistakes, gets a little loose. TCU plays smart, grinds it out, plays hard, hangs around, wins the game. That to me is the kind of team that, like, give me a favorite that's like, disrespecting TCU and has a bunch of 5 stars. Like, give me a quarterback who has great upside, but maybe will throw a couple picks. Like, give me that team, and I'm here to pick TCU. I kind of don't feel like Michigan is that at all. I feel like Michigan is like tough offensive line, really good defense, run the ball. I've been saying it for 2 years, really well coached. And particularly the aspect of running the ball. You look at the EPA per play, TCU ranks defensively 46th in the nation in run defense in that regard, which is the worst of the teams here. They're even worse in pass defense, but I just like, I don't like it. It's not that I don't believe in TCU. It's that I think in all this stuff, matchups matter. And I don't like this for TCU. Just like a year ago, I didn't like the Georgia matchup for Michigan. I do like this matchup for Michigan this time. Let's start there. The matchup, the stylistic, motivational, intangible matchup. Am I being too harsh in saying it's not good for TCU?
So here's what I'll say, right? One of the things that stuck the most in my mind about this matchup was the Big Ten championship game. Michigan plays Purdue, and Purdue's kind of able to move the ball at will through the air in a lot of ways. Now, they're not able to move it on the ground. Obviously, that's a huge part of it. I think that TCU's better on the ground. I think they have a better offensive line. I think that they'll stand up better to Michigan's pressure than what Purdue did. And the other part of it is that I think that TCU will be better in the red zone. We'll be able to convert more of those opportunities from field goals into touchdowns. I think Purdue, they I think had 5 field goals within the 30-yard line, which is just not something that Sonny Dykes will do. He just simply will not. But, when I looked at that game plan, Purdue absolutely had a chance to win that football game with the way that they were able to manage the game. And part of that is what they did offensively. I actually think that what Purdue did defensively kind of was interesting too. Obviously, Michigan was able to move the ball on the ground, but they made the game kind of hard for J.J. McCarthy through the air. I think TCU is going to be able to do that at a higher level with their great combination of cornerbacks in Travius Hodges-Tomlinson and Josh Newton. I think they've got better safeties and run support than what Purdue was able to have, especially somebody like Mark Perry, who's been really good for them. They've got a linebacker in Johnny Hodges, who I think is built to play in this football game. He played for Navy for 3 years and has been a huge factor for them in the running game. Now, Donovan Edwards is going to rush for 200 yards. I'm just going to say that right now. But I don't think that that's a death sentence for TCU by any means. It means that Michigan is going to be able to put together some really nice long drives. That's absolutely going to happen. But I think that TCU is going to be able to do some of the same stuff against Michigan's defense with their versatility, with their ability to be creative in the quarterback run game as well. I think is going to be a huge part of this game plan. Their ability to make plays on third and mid, I think is going to be a huge part of what they need to do. And you kind of mentioned obviously having, getting into a shootout with a very talented team. For me, I think that I like the idea better of TCU having mismatches, which I think that they do. I think Quentin Johnston is better than anybody Michigan will line up against him at cornerback. I think that Kendre Miller as an individual player is probably better than what Michigan's going to line up, in one-on-one situations. And I think that TCU has players who can win one-on-one matchups against Michigan. Now, Michigan's going to try to stay on schedule. They're going to try to make things difficult for TCU by getting after the passer, by making Max Duggan uncomfortable. They're extremely well coached, and that can't be taken away from them, and that's why they play so much as a unit. But for me, I mean, the one other thing that I'll point to is they played against the best running back in the country this year in Bijan Robinson, and they completely shut him down. So I think that Michigan can't be a one-dimensional team against TCU, and I am curious, and I might be wrong, whether with their cornerback play, TCU can turn Michigan into a one-dimensional team and create an opportunity like what they had against Texas to make Donovan Edwards' job not shut him down. He's going to, again, I think he's going to rush for 200 yards, but it could be on 35 carries, and I think that they take that.
So let's start with the matchup of the Michigan offense versus the TCU defense. everybody agrees with your point about Bijan Robinson. I do think there's a difference between the best running back and the best running game.
Yes.
Michigan and EPA per play is ranked 11th in the nation in rushing offense. Again, EPA, it's the expected points added per play. It's just a metric of how good you are in this aspect of the game over sort of like a typical team. So actually, I mean, 11th for Michigan in that regard, I actually think is low, right? I mean, are they the 11th best rushing attack in the country? No, they're better than that. They've run for more yards. They're third in the nation in rushing yards per game, behind only the 2 service academies. Like, they are as dedicated to running the ball as anybody in the country. Texas, for as good as Bijan Robinson is, and nobody is arguing about how good Bijan Robinson is. If we had a draft of running backs in college football, I'd take him first. Texas was 45th in rushing EPA. So that's how, like, scheme, offensive line, everything else that goes into a run game. Michigan's 11th, and I think that's actually Michigan's even better than 11th. Texas was 45th. Nobody in the Big 12 was higher than 27th. It was Oklahoma, and I think Oklahoma's top 2 backs ran for like 180 on TCU. They have not seen this. They've seen a great back. They haven't seen this plan of attack, this offensive line, this cohesion in a run game, this variety in a run game, the way Sharon Moore and Matt Weiss dial this offense up, the way Jim Harbaugh wants to attack you. And this 3-3-5 defense, Sonny Dykes has come out and said it, that they want to stop the run and put the game on J.J. McCarthy. And I think you kind of knew it in the moment. There's obviously been a ton of talk at the Ohio State-Georgia game, where I am in Atlanta, about the big plays that Ohio State gave up in the passing game to Michigan that blew that open. Even the Georgia people talking about that are saying things like, well, that was a much closer game. It wasn't a blowout. It didn't get really out of hand until the 2 runs late by Michigan. And, Jim Knowles, the Ohio State defensive coordinator, it's like one of those things. If you took away your 5 worst plays, what do you think? Like that, they're not making excuses for it, but there were particular breakdowns. So to say, okay, well, TCU is going to say, we're going to try to stop the Michigan run game. And then, by the way, stopping the run, selling out to stop the run is what creates those breakdowns. You put guys on island. It's not a coincidence. It's like you sell out to stop something and you give up something else in return. I understand the philosophy there of TCU. Let's stop the run and put it on J.J. McCarthy. Can that work? Because A, to me, they haven't seen this when it comes to a run game. And then B, I do think the more, and this is your chance. Ooh, I'm teeing you up to talk about your guy. Okay, talk about JJ. The more we have seen from JJ McCarthy, this is his moment. Just like the Ohio State game was his moment. They keep him under wraps. We know he's got some skills. And now, boom. All right, Sonny Dykes. Like, I don't think Michigan's afraid of that. Because A, I don't think Michigan believes anyone can really stop their run game. And then B, if you want to sell out to do that, fine. We'll let JJ do his thing. Can they handle that? Can this 3-3-5 defense effectively shut down this run game, not just this running back? And then if they do wind up doing that to a degree where you put it on JJ McCarthy, does that mean TCU wins? Or is there a chance that JJ McCarthy is like, okay, I got this?
So, I mean, look, JJ McCarthy heading into the Ohio State game had 0 passes of more than 45 yards. Like those were breakdowns that nobody had broken down against JJ McCarthy that year, right? Like that is failures of Ohio State. And when you look at TCU's secondary, they are just a better group than what Ohio State is putting out there. Again, Travius Hodges-Tomlinson won the Thorpe Award. He was the best defensive back in America, according to some people. I mean, I mentioned it yesterday. Little surprised he won, but he is a very fundamentally sound cornerback who's going to be in the right spot. Josh Newton, same deal. I think that they're a tremendous combination. I think they will be able to take out Michigan's receivers to more of an extent than certainly Ohio State did. And so I do think that this is a more difficult job for JJ McCarthy than what he's faced this season because of what they have. And, when TCU has been able to bring their safeties down, which I expect them to do, they have been a good team. They've been really, really good in second halves. They've schemed up off of kind of those first half momentums in a big way. And that's a big part of why they've outscored basically everybody in the second half of football games. So I do think that they're going to be able to make JJ McCarthy's life difficult. Look, when you look at the per play, the success rate, all that sort of stuff with JJ McCarthy, he's extremely efficient. He's number 11 in offensive EPA per pass. He's top 15 in success rate per pass. but I don't think that actually does a good job of expressing volume. I do think that volume matters. And he's completed 12 passes per game over his last 5 games. He's completed 52% of his passes over the past 5 games. We remember those 3 touchdown passes against Ohio State and kind of say, okay, they're fixed. Their pass game is great. We should feel good about this. I'm just not there. I'm just not quite there. And I think that, look, TCU has not faced a running game quite like Michigan's. I mean, not even really all that close to what Michigan can do. But TCU has shut down much better passing offenses than what Michigan is putting out there with less help, So I think that it's going to be a good opportunity for them to kind of show some of that. I do expect that JJ McCarthy is going to have a really big breakaway touchdown pass. I think that's going to happen. I don't think that they're going to be able to fully shut him down, hold him to 150 yards or anything like that. But I don't think that JJ McCarthy play to play is going to be able to have the kind of success against TCU that he had against Ohio State, because I think that TCU is just much more mature in the secondary than what Ohio State was.
The thing about JJ McCarthy, I don't know what matters with JJ McCarthy. That I think we only may have seen like 2 games of the real JJ McCarthy. He did throw for 300 yards against Indiana when they kind of needed him a little bit early on. The second to last game of the regular season, Blake Corum gets hurt. It kind of throws off everything Michigan's trying to do. Donovan Edwards is also out. They have no run game. They barely beat Illinois 19-17. That was weird. Ohio State, 12 of 24 for 263. Purdue indoors, 11 of 17 for 161. So again, 12 for 24 is not great. He was 3 of 9, I think, at the moment when he threw the first touchdown pass on the broken tackle, when he did a good job getting rid of the ball on 3rd down ahead of the blitz. The group of games that I would use in the past to get a read on the JJ McCarthy we're going to see against TCU would be a very small sample to me. I would not go back very far in his history.
I'd go back 2 games. I think that's all that matters.
Okay, those 2. And again, he only completed 50% of his passes against Ohio State. But again, he started off 3 of 9, and then he hit the ones they needed to hit. And then they got a big lead. Then they kind of shut it down and had 2 huge touchdown runs, and it was kind of a weird game. This is why he's here. I just have a lot of respect for how Michigan goes about it fundamentally. And I think they are adaptable. I think if for some reason TCU does shut down the run game, I think Michigan would be ready to say, all right, Cornelius Johnson, okay, Ronnie Bell, we need you more. Let's go. Right? You like the tight ends at Michigan. I do think that sometimes I think they run it because you can't stop them running it. And so then, well, why would you do anything else? Like, you just do the thing that's required to win. And the thing that's required to win is run the ball down your throat. And also, if you stop them early to running the ball, they're not going to stop running the ball. They're going to keep trying because they have a belief, like they did against Penn State, when kind of a goofy game in the first half, and then they just ran over Penn State in the second half. And Penn State's one of the 10 best teams in the country. I think it's rough. I think it's rough for TCU. Do you think TCU's best past victory is a game high 30s, low 40s? Could TCU win a game 24-21, or does TCU have to hope this turns into a little bit of a shootout?
No, I think they absolutely could win that kind of game. I mean, remember, this is not a similar caliber of team, but they beat Texas 17-10 and held them to 3 offensive points, right? Like, they were able to do that. And
I will say your selectivity of Texas references. Typically Texas is like, every time I say the word Texas, you say, what do you say?
Why are we talking about Texas on a playoff show?
And now it's like, oh, well, TCU beat Texas 17-10. TCU shut down Bijan Robinson. It's like, it's Texas. It's Texas. It's Texas. Really?
It's very clear. Texas can do certain things well and can't do certain things well. So when you have success against the things that Texas does well, that means more to me than when you have success against the things that Texas can't do well. That's what it comes down to for me. But no, I do think that TCU can win games that stay low. I mean, I think even look at that Baylor game, right? It was 29-28. They kept him under 30 points. I think that there are moments where TCU has showed, especially in the second half of the year. Iowa State, I think, might have finished last place in the Big 12, but like, is a pretty good team, and TCU was able to hold them to 14 points, right? So like, I don't think that they just have to win shootouts. I think that they do have the ability to grind games out, to make things ugly, to kind of just stay on schedule. And that versatility, especially in the second half of the year, is part of why I do like what TCU is doing right now. If this is early season TCU, if this is still the same team that had to go to multiple overtimes to win 43-40 against Oklahoma State, I don't feel quite as good about that. But I do think that they're a little bit different now, especially on the defensive side of the ball.
Okay, so let's talk about TCU offense versus Michigan defense. And we talked about this when we had Drew Davidson on to talk about the TCU breakdown. Quentin Johnston in the middle of the year, 14 catches for 206 against Kansas, in the Oklahoma State double overtime game you just referenced, 8 catches for 180. Backed off, then had an injury. They spread the ball around a little bit more. The idea that a month off, would he be even more of himself? 4 catches for 139 in the Big 12 championship game against Kansas State. Do you think a 12-catch Quentin Johnston game is out there for TCU against Michigan? If you were TCU, would you try to make that happen? And if they can make that happen, what does that mean for this game? Is he the guy? Could Quentin Johnston be unstoppable, and that's the story of a TCU win?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Quentin Johnston is probably the number one receiver off the board in the 2023 NFL draft. I think that you can make the argument that he is the single most talented player.
Maybe Marv's
a sophomore. Marv's a sophomore. Yeah, Marv's a sophomore.
Sorry.
Yeah, and which I will mention, Marv did have a huge game against Michigan. He was not the reason that they lost. But I think that, so he could be the number one receiver off the board. He could be the number one most talented individual player in this game. I think that there's a very good argument for that. I don't think that Michigan has much of a matchup for him. They've got some great players. They scheme it up really well. Again, I think they're going to try to take him out of this game. But so I would personally say I don't expect it to be a 12-catch game necessarily for Quentin Johnston, but I expect it to be a 6-catch game with like a touchdown and a breakaway play. And like I think it's going to be more the moment than it is volume. But yeah, there's absolutely a pathway out there for Quentin Johnston to just dominate his matchup, for him to just consistently create separation, for him to consistently beat guys one-on-one. I mean, this is one of the most athletic players, one of the biggest players, one of the longest players in the country. And like you said, he has not been healthy for basically the entire season. I was talking to some TCU sources before the Big 12 championship game because Quentin Johnston did not play against Iowa State while kind of nursing that injury. And they said this is the healthiest that Quentin Johnston has been in 5 weeks. And he went out and, like you said, had 139 yards in the Big 12 championship game. Well, now he's going to be fully healthy. That is the expectation coming into this game. I absolutely think that there's a chance that he has a 150-yard, a 200-yard type of game against Michigan. And more even than having the individual production himself, I could see him having the kind of game where Michigan just has to dedicate so much help to him that you start seeing other guys go off too, where you start seeing Tay Barber have a big game, where you have Darius Davis have a big play as well. Because I think that you really saw in the moments where Quentin Johnston wasn't healthy how much his absence impacted that TCU team. Well, even when he's not the guy catching the ball, I think he completely flips the field for TCU in the way that he's able to impact that offense.
I did think the Michigan corners hung in decently well against Ohio State. DJ Turner and Will Johnson, even though Emeka Egbuka had 9 catches for 125 and Marvin Harrison Jr. had 7 catches for 120, I thought they did make some plays. I think Will Johnson especially has come on for Michigan. But Quentin Johnston, as you said, mock draft database, which just is what it is, NFL mock draft database. It pulls in every mock draft in the world, and just it doesn't mean it's right, but it's comprehensive. At the moment, Quentin Johnston, number 11 on the board for the 2023 NFL draft, number 1 receiver, as you said. So that is the type of talent that we are talking about here. I do think he is a prototypical number 1 receiver in basically every way. And it's a story that everybody talks about when you get the bowl season, everybody getting healthy. when you have your best player who was obviously limited during points of the season, you think, okay, well, this guy can get back to himself. That matters a lot. So it matters more for TCU probably than it does for Michigan from an injury standpoint. All right. Where do you think this game is? Before we give our scores, where are you in this game? What's like your game script? How do you think this game plays out before you give an actual score?
So I think that for TCU to win this game, or to have a chance to win this game, I'm looking at a stat that my good friend Stats of War, Parker Fleming on Twitter, he created this stat called echo rates. And basically what it means is the most sustained drives. And Michigan ranks number 1 in echo rates, and TCU ranks number 12 nationally in echo rate. So these are two teams that like to stay on schedule and like to stay on script. So I think that it's going to come down to whether TCU can be a team that stays on script. I know Michigan will. That's not going to, I think, be in question. The question is whether TCU can stay on script, whether they can put together long drives. So for me, it does come down to what does TCU do on third down. I talked about it a little bit yesterday. I think that third down is really going to be in both of these college football playoff games, the down that kind of decides the games. Can they get into third and short situations? Can they keep the chains moving? Because I know that TCU can be more explosive than Michigan can. That's not a question in my mind. I think that Kendre Miller can break off a touchdown. I think Quentin Johnston will have a breakaway play, but can they stay on schedule to create those opportunities and have them matter and limit to a certain extent Michigan's opportunities to stay on the field as well? So I do think that this is going to be a pretty back and forth game in terms of lengthy drive, back and forth. So that's what I'd say. I think that it's probably going to be a lower scoring game, relatively speaking, because of it, because I don't think there's going to be a lot of possessions because both of these teams are very comfortable holding onto the ball. And I think that again, it's going to come down in a large way to Max Duggan kind of being able to make some of these miraculous plays. Because look, TCU has spots where they can win one-on-one matchups. Obviously, Quentin Johnston, like you talked about, I think Kendre Miller can make plays in space as well. But some of it is just going to have to be gamesmanship too. It's going to have to be Max Duggan going out there and showing why he finished number 2 in the Heisman voting. So that's what I'd say. I think that it's going to probably time-wise be a pretty short game because both these teams, I think, are going to try to stay on the field and play high-efficiency football. But that's kind of where I see this thing going.
This game is a 7.5 point line. Michigan favored. The over under is 58.5. I'm going to pick Michigan 34-21. I don't think it is a blowout from the jump, but I think Michigan is in control most of the game, maybe in a way that in the middle of the third quarter, TCU has a drive down 10 where they can cut it to one score, right? That not that it's boring, but also not that TCU is on the cusp of taking the lead at any point. Not that Michigan fans are getting super nervous about it, but it's still competitive. So I have a 13-point win, a little bit on the under. I think your game script of like back and forth, long drives, then if you get a stop and you force a punt, we just had a 7-minute drive that led to no points. That's how you kind of get to the under sometimes in games like this. I do think the Quentin Johnston idea of, well, what if he catches 2 50-50 balls for 60-yard touchdowns? It's like, well, that would change the game, in my opinion. Then, and I do think that you have to try to account for that in some way. But I just think Michigan is efficient, and I think this is a good matchup for Michigan because I think the whole deal with Michigan is they have a way of doing things. With this new style they've adapted the last 2 years. And then it's like, okay, well, what if they face a more talented team? What are they going to do? And I do think that's still the worry when they face Ohio State. And it's like, no, we're tougher than Ohio State. We'll control the ball. We'll run the ball. We'll do all those things. Against Georgia last year, it was like, well, it's just too much, right? If they played Bama, it's like, I don't know if that's maybe it's just too much. I think Michigan's more talented top to bottom than TCU. I think TCU has, 5 or 6, a handful of All-American style players that allow them to compete and have led their season. But I just think Michigan, I think, is going to be comfortable most of the game. So I have a not easy, but comfortable 13-point win for Michigan. What's your actual score?
Yeah, I think that it's definitely going to be a game in the third quarter. It's definitely going to come down to one team or the other making a play. I just think that team is going to beat TCU. I think that whether it's a JJ McCarthy interception because he gets a little too comfortable out there, whether it's a Quentin Johnston breakaway, whether it's a Kendre Miller breakaway, like the one that changed the game against Texas. I think TCU is the team that has made these plays all year. I think they've been just an elite team in the second half, which is something that Michigan hasn't necessarily had to do all year because of their kind of soft schedule. So I think that TCU... I feel like at this point I have to stick with it, right? I feel like I'm like the guy who's picking TCU to have a chance to win this football game. So I'm going to stick with them. I think it ends up being a 31-27 TCU victory. Very ugly, very close. I wouldn't be surprised at all if the advanced numbers at the end of the game say that Michigan had like a 70% win probability, but TCU just made the plays when they matter. Because the reality is, if TCU if Max Duggan had fallen 6 inches further forward, they would have finished the year undefeated because they just know how to make these plays in these moments. And I think that they're going to be the team that when the going gets tough, I don't think anybody's going to pull away. I think this is going to be a fourth quarter, last 5 minutes kind of game. And I think that TCU is the team that's more comfortable in those situations.
I think the only other guy that maybe would pick TCU is Desmond Howard. And he won the Heisman at Michigan, so he's definitely not going to do it.
So he's not going to do that.
You're Mr. Texas. Desmond Howard is like Mr. Texas number 2. He really believed in Baylor and Texas A&M this year, so it's all on your shoulders. But they'll have a parade for you in Fort Worth if they win. They'll have a Shehan parade. How far are you from Fort Worth? You could like ride your bike to your parade, right?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it would be a long ride, but probably 20 miles or so, 30 minutes. I'm down there quite a bit. It's a cool little area.
I'm coming to the parade if they have a Shehan parade if TCU wins the national title. I'm going to come. We'll have a college football Survivor Show float in the Shehan parade. Now that's my dream. Now I actually want that to happen. Okay, so we're split. 1 pick for Michigan, 1 pick for TCU. Will we be split on the next game? We'll do Ohio State, Georgia after this in the College Football Survivor Show.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.
All right, Doug and Shehan, this game, Ohio State, Georgia, the second of the semifinals, is a 6.5 point line. Georgia favored by that amount. 62.5 is the over under. I will say off the top, I think this game is a coin flip. I would definitely take Ohio State in the points. I think there are things that both these teams do well that the other team will have trouble with. As much as fascinated as we all are by the Ohio State offense versus the Georgia defense matchup, I really think Ohio State's defense might have problems with Georgia's offense and what Georgia's going to do. I do think this game is much more like a shootout. Ohio State indoors is good for Ohio State. They have not played indoors since the semifinal when they beat Clemson in 2020 because they haven't made the last 2 Big Ten title games. Like, they're built for this. This is what they're built for. And I don't think they care that it's in Atlanta. Like, they like being on, and I don't think the noise will be too loud to mess. That's the big, like, right on the road. It's like,
it's an NFL stadium. There's going to be no noise.
And plus, both teams got 13,000 tickets. And then there's going to be a bunch of Ohio State fans that came and like the other tickets. It's not like it's going to be 90-10 Georgia fans just because it's in the state of Georgia, right?
Also, Georgia fans are going to be saving up to buy those national championship game tickets anyway.
That's true. So I think the indoor track is quite a plus for Ohio State. And Georgia, since 2019, Ohio State played 4 times indoors. Georgia's played 7. This will be 7 times indoors. This is Georgia's 3rd game in this stadium, in Mercedes-Benz Stadium this year. But Ohio State is more built for it. And you look back at Georgia gives up. The Georgia defense has not shut people down indoors in perfect conditions, right? They've given up 411 yards per game in those 7 indoor games. So I don't think this is going to be the Georgia defense smothering Ohio State. I think it's a game, and I'll tell you that my score is in the 40s. Does that sound right to you, or are you going to step forward and remind me that it's the Georgia defense? What are you doing?
No, I'm not going to do that. I think that Georgia's defense this year has been very good, but we have to be careful not to pretend that this is 2021 Georgia. This is not as complete a unit. This is not as complete a team. But on the flip side, they've also probably been more efficient and effective offensively than they were last season as well, with a 12th year senior quarterback in Stetson Bennett. So I think that, yeah, this is absolutely going to be a high scoring game. I'd remind people that the last game that Georgia played against LSU was a 50-30 ball game against LSU in the SEC championship game. I think this Georgia defense can get thrown on a little bit. Now, again, at the same time, it is a Georgia defense. It's going to be well schemed. It's incredibly talented. Something I mentioned on the show on Tuesday is I think that Georgia is going to just like take and spit out every Ohio State running back. I don't think Ohio State's going to be able to run the ball at all with Mayan Williams and with Chip Trayanum, who I think are both very good players, but this Georgia defensive interior is special. But I do think it's going to come down to, who makes these plays, who's more efficient, and whether both teams are able to kind of keep up from a scoring perspective. So a little bit of a different matchup. I think we've all really for the past couple of years, maybe since 2019 or 20, been waiting for Georgia to have to play Ohio State. It's finally here. So I'm kind of curious to see what happens.
Weird Ohio State running back situation, which you could say basically the last 2/3 of the season has been that way for Ohio State. Mayan Williams, who had an ankle injury, was not himself in the Michigan game. Everybody was saying, oh, this is, again, the month off thing was huge. Of anybody for Ohio State, Mayan Williams was at the top of that list. And now he hasn't been around. So he wasn't at interviews on Tuesday, and at the open practice window on Wednesday morning, as we record this Wednesday afternoon, he wasn't at that practice. So they're saying he's under the weather. That might be right. But Dallin Hayden, the true freshman who had run Shehan Jeyarajah, also not available for interviews.
It's that time of year, man.
Season.
It's that time of year.
So Dallin Hayden, who had run for more than 100 yards in the Maryland game and then just was not really part of the game plan in the Michigan game, surprisingly, was first up in drills at running back. We don't know who's going to run the ball, which I think is good because I think they just don't. Georgia, EPA against the rush defensively, number 1 in the country. Against the pass, number 23. I think you have to throw on these guys to win. And I think the idea of Ohio State does not have a run game that it can rely upon, I almost think is good because you don't bother then. The run game, bubble screens are going to be the run game. RPO throws are going to be the run game. I don't think they're going to spend a whole lot of time trying to run between the tackles against Jalen Carter and Nazir Stackhouse and Zion Logue and everybody else that you line up on that Georgia defensive front that is like a wall of people. And I almost think that fits. Don't trick yourself into thinking you can do it. Give up. Has there not been this thing? It's like sometimes, maybe it's just Generation Z. I don't know. But isn't there a thing? There's like a line of thinking now that quitting is good. People are like, you'll have a short life. Why spend time doing something that makes you miserable, that you're terrible at, that you're not getting anything productive out of? Quit. Like the quitting is good revolution. I think the Ohio State quit. Don't even put a running back on the field. I don't know. I said put the fullback out there and just acknowledge that he's there to pass protect. I'm here. I am CJ Stroud's bodyguard because he is going to throw the ball 81 times today. We're not even trying. Our run game is flipping the ball on a bubble screen to Marvin Harrison Jr. and telling Cade Stover to block. That's our run game. Here's our run game. It's a little slant off an RPO. Why are we bothering with this? I think that fits. I almost think it fits. It fits. No quarterback run. No 516 yards passing, 4 yards rushing. That's the game plan for Ohio State. And I'm exaggerating like 11%. That's really what I think. And I think it's what they might do.
And it probably is what they should do, right? It's like you said, Georgia is very good against the pass. They are like world beaters against the run. Part of it is who they've played, right? I mean, I don't think it's been a very good year in the SEC for quarterbacks, but for running backs, and I think it's been a pretty good year for quarterbacks. But I do think that it's probably the game plan that Ohio State has to employ. They have to see if they can get over the top of the Georgia defense. And by the way, if they're able to get over the top of the Georgia defense, I think that it's one of those game plans that maybe you need the pass to set up the run, or maybe you need to spread people out to create creases inside. I think that that's maybe more what you need to be looking at. The funny thing about this game is, so you look at Georgia versus Ohio State. By the way, all of their advanced stats are basically like, oh yeah, this is the best team in the country. By the way, like number one in Ohio State's number 1 in EPA margin. Georgia's number 3. Ohio State is number 4 in offensive EPA. Georgia's number 6 in defensive EPA. So like everybody's good at everything is the point. But I do think that the stat that kind of stands out to me, and again, this is like, this is the level that we're talking about, right? I think that these are maybe two best teams in the country. But I think that the stat that kind of stands out to me is Ohio State is number 4 in EPA per pass. They are incredibly efficient passing the ball, but Georgia's number 1 in passing success rates. So I think that that's actually a very telling stat. Ohio State creates huge opportunities more consistently every single passing play, but Georgia succeeds every passing play.
Georgia's offense you're talking about.
Offensive passing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that they are trying to accomplish 2 different things whenever they are passing the ball. And I think that this is actually going to play a huge role in how this game goes. Stetson Bennett, he's not trying to throw 70-yard touchdown strikes to Ladd McConkey. He's trying to complete passes that get the ball moving down the field. They are a very much hold on to the ball, be efficient, stay on schedule, stay on track team. Ohio State does stay on schedule for the most part. They're number 2 in that echo rate stat that I mentioned. But in the passing game especially, they are trying to be explosive. That's a huge part of what they're trying to do. They're trying to go downfield. They're trying to be accurate. They're trying to stretch out a defense. And for me, I think that Georgia's strategy in passing the ball actually matches up pretty well against Ohio State. We obviously saw Ohio State struggle at times in the passing game, especially in allowing big plays against Michigan. I don't think this is going to be a big play game from Georgia. I think this is going to be a high efficiency game. And I'm curious your thoughts on that. Do you think that the strategy of consistent success maybe could be something that Georgia uses to their advantage, even though Ohio State is obviously a more dynamic passing team?
In the end, I think we agree that the Ohio State offense matchup versus the Georgia defense matchup, Ohio State's going to be able to move the ball, and it's not going to be the Georgia smother zone. We acknowledge how good the Georgia defense is, but indoors, this matchup, Ohio State will move it. So as we flip now, you've led us to the other side of the ball, and I think it's super important here. I really think you're onto something here. I think there are stats that you can find that show Ohio State defends the pass against tight ends and running backs pretty well. They haven't seen a team throw the ball to running backs like this. I think Kenny McIntosh is super important in this game. I really like him. They run 3 backs because they want to keep guys fresh, but he is a number 1 back. The Brock Bowers, Darnell Washington matchup is apparent to anybody with eyeballs. They're a problem for everyone. There's a world in which you could say, hey, Ohio State's corners have been maybe the weakness of this defense for much of the year. If you had a team with great receivers, if they were playing Caleb Williams throwing to Jordan Addison and everybody else in the USC passing attack, maybe that would be a real problem. But I also do think, I thought in the end, Ohio State's defense was built better to try to stop the Michigan run game. And in the end, I think they sold out so much to try to stop the run. They got beat over the top against the pass. A lot of comparisons here as we talked to everybody about this game. Jim Knowles acknowledges, yes, there is a similarity between the Michigan and Georgia offensive styles, right? 2 tight ends. It's not a spread offense. It's more of a, like a nice run pass mesh. But Georgia definitely throws the ball more than Michigan, for sure. Formationally, it'll look similar at times, but they're going to throw it a lot more. So in the end, I actually think that is a tough, even though the stats say Ohio State can defend tight ends, I thought they did a good job defending Michael Mayer in the Notre Dame game. They haven't seen this. And I think there's an elegance to the Georgia offense. I think Todd Monken really dials it up. And I just think Ohio State's going to have trouble because Georgia is, as you're on it, they're going to be efficient. And maybe Ohio State locks down the, hey, we're not going to give up. We're not going to screw up coverages and miss tackles and give up gigantic plays. But I think they might get marched on. I think Ohio State might have a real problem trying to get Georgia off the field. I think this Jim Knowles defensive coordinator, Todd Monken offensive coordinator matchup is fascinating. When you look again at what Ohio State does, I just think the competence of the Georgia offense, and again, Georgia in the end throws it about as much as Ohio State does. I think Stetson Bennett has more passing yards, as you mentioned, than C.J. Stroud does this year. I don't know that Ohio State stops them. I think that's going to be a struggle, which it sort of feels like you're in that same place as well that the Georgia offense might have. Stetson Bennett, man, I think Stetson Bennett's going to get outside the pocket, have a couple 12-yard runs, I think he's going to scramble around and make a couple big plays. I do think Todd Monken seemed to indicate that, the AD Mitchell, he's their best sort of downfield threat. They've been frustrated. He's been frustrated. AD Mitchell has been by his health issues all year. If they get him back in a more substantial way for this game, again, the month off, I think it's an uphill battle for Ohio State to try to handle this Georgia offense.
So, and another stat that I'm really going to be looking closely at is, Ohio State and Georgia are two of the most efficient teams in the country at finishing in the red zone. Georgia's number 1 at 97%, and Ohio State is number 3 at 95%. And actually, Ohio State is more efficient at scoring touchdowns. They score touchdowns on 76%, whereas Georgia's at 68%. But here's my question. If Ohio State has to give up on the run, if they don't think that Mayan Williams and Chip Trayanum can be efficient in those spots, does that become an issue? Does that become an issue if every single red zone trip turns into having to throw into tight windows against Georgia's defense, a really, really big and physical Georgia defense? Does that become a problem?
Kevin Wilson, the offensive coordinator for Ohio State, talks about that all the time. He says you put a picket fence at the goal line and line up 7 defensive players and all right, where are you going to throw it? And if you don't have a running game and if your quarterback's not going to be a run threat, how do you cash it in? And I think when you look back at the 2019 Ohio State Clemson semifinal, which I think is not a bad comparison for this game. That was a really good Clemson offense. That was a really good Clemson defense. Ohio State moved the ball early in that game, did not cash in the red zone, and then Clemson came back and won. There have been some slow starts in some of these games. I do think some of the best defenses Ohio State's played against Iowa, against Penn State, it took them a while, but they worked it out eventually, right? They worked it out later in the game. But that was the Iowa offense, which is awful. And the Penn State offense, which has some dudes, but is not as good, is not close to as good as this Georgia offense. I do think if it takes a little time, I think that could happen too. I think one scenario is Ohio State moves the ball from the jump, has some trouble cashing in, or it takes them a little time to work it out. A couple empty drives early, but it comes around. But by the time it comes around, Stetson Bennett's been stacking up points, and now they're behind, and all of a sudden you're up against it a little bit. I think either of those is possible. I really do think Ohio State's going to move the ball. But yes, inside the 10 is where, hey, and I've been saying it all year, it's like, don't run it. And then people are like, shut your mouth, Doug. What are you talking about? And I do just think from a realistic, I'm not saying if I was designing the ideal team, I'm saying this Ohio State team that doesn't have Ezekiel Elliott, that doesn't have J.K. Dobbin, that has this issue, that's what I'd do. In an ideal world, yeah, bang it to a guy 25 times a game. Perfect. They don't have that. That magnifies in the red zone. And it could really, Kevin Wilson even talked about it. They've stacked up they've stacked up yards in these indoor games. They haven't always stacked up points. They have not always stacked up points, and they can't have empty drives while they're moving the ball, or Georgia's going to make them pay.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about that. Again, we're going to go ahead and not get into any CJ Stroud discussion, but seriously, if he is somebody who could convert those 2-yard opportunities into rushing touchdowns, I think that changes this game quite a bit, right? If you just feel like he can get you to the first down marker, he can get you over the goal line. I think that matters. And I think they have to ask him to do it at times, because I do think, like you said, they're going to be able to get 20-20, I think. And it's going to be, look, when we don't have a breakaway Marvin Harrison Jr. tiptoeing touchdown, can we make it happen? Because I don't think they're going to be able to make it happen with their running backs. I think they're going to have to get CJ Stroud out of the pocket in some of these red zone opportunities. And I don't know. I'm very, very curious. I think that, another matchup that I'm really going to be keeping a close eye on, and we talked about it a lot on yesterday's show, is CJ Stroud versus Christopher Smith, the great Georgia safety. It's somebody who's been around a long time, seen a lot of great receivers come through. It's going to be, I think, a chess match between those two guys, Christopher Smith and CJ Stroud, to kind of see, can we get in the right position, with sort of the way that I shade? Can I make CJ Stroud go to the wrong side of the field? Can I make him make the wrong decision at times? And I think that ultimately what this game comes down to, to kind of start to get into what does this game script look like, it's going to be a who blinks first situation. And Georgia is so ridiculously efficient on the offensive side of the ball, and they scheme so smart that I think that they are going to be able to move relatively at will against this Ohio State defense, to the point at least where Ohio State's offense needs to press a little bit, and I think they're going to blink first.
I do think, there's obviously a lot of comparisons that people are making between this game and the semifinal for Ohio State in the first playoff in 2014. But you look back at that game, Ohio State versus Alabama, and one of the things that came up in that game was Bama didn't run the ball when it felt like Bama had something going. Lane Kiffin didn't give the ball enough to Derrick Henry, and I think Bama fans always regret that. And Bama had a quarterback in Blake Sims who was not the playmaker that Stetson Bennett is. Stetson Bennett will make plays on you, and I do think Todd Monken, if he finds something, he's going to go with what works, right? I think he's very artistic in his game plans, and so I do think that's going to be a problem for Ohio State. And this red zone stuff, it's just a reality. I haven't done it. Everyone talks about like red zone scoring. I always want to talk about like non-red zone scoring. Like, what's the reverse of that? Who scores the most from outside the red zone? Ohio State in 2015, when they were coming off the national championship in 2014 and they couldn't figure out the quarterback situation with Cardale Jones and JT Barrett. One of the things they did on the way to figuring that out was they made JT Barrett their red zone quarterback, because with all that talent in 2015, Michael Thomas and Ezekiel Elliott and Braxton Miller and all those guys, they couldn't score in the red zone, and it's because they didn't have a quarterback run threat. Cardale Jones could throw it through a wall, but they couldn't cash in. So they put JT Barrett in the red zone, and he started running the ball, and that's how they scored. Like, you wouldn't really do it, but there was a time, when Tate Martell was at Ohio State, and it was like, hey, like Dwayne Haskins and Tate Martell, they ran into that trouble a little bit. It's like, I don't know, when Ohio State's had a throwing quarterback who doesn't move a lot, and you're trying to even up the numbers in the red zone, everybody does it, right? You go to some version of a wildcat, whatever. I'd be fascinated. Chip Trainum is a guy who's been a linebacker. He's been a running back. What about a direct snap to Chip Trainum at the 8-yard line, right? Just like run wildcat. Let's even up the numbers that way. Put CJ Stroud out at receiver.
There's got to be a high school quarterback. One of those receivers, one of those running backs has to have been a high school quarterback, right?
But I mean, people do this all the time. This wouldn't be weird. I mean, it's like Ohio State hasn't done it, but people line up and direct snap to the running back at times. Like, yeah, I mean, like that, I wouldn't be afraid to do that kind of thing, because I do think they're going to have to cash this in. I do think it's a back and forth game. I think it's a game into the fourth quarter. I think it's a game that Ohio State is absolutely capable of winning. I honestly think if they played it 10 times, they'd each win 5. I expect to both play well. I will be surprised if Ohio State comes out and lays an egg. I will be really surprised. I just think motivationally, I think being inside, what they do best, I do think we will get. I will be very surprised. And listen, there's a lot of the Ohio State fan base that is still teetering a little bit, given Ohio State has admitted some struggles with the NIL recruiting world. They're coming off a loss to Michigan. This is a program in a very weird spot, considering it's one of the 4 teams in the playoff. The only way to fix it's winning, right? It's one of those things that's like, oh man, how do they fix NIL? It's like, well, you try to fix NIL in pursuit of a national championship. So if they just win the national championship, then like we can worry about that later, right? Let's worry about like what's happening on the field. Winning is what will solve everything for Ohio State right now. If they don't play well, it's going to be an odd offseason. If they lose to a very good Georgia team and they fight tooth and nail, it's still going to be an odd offseason for Ohio State if Ohio State doesn't win. If they end the season with a Michigan loss, kind of a little bit of a weird recruiting class, and then a loss to Georgia, it's going to be an interesting offseason. I think they compete. I have been working toward picking Ohio State since the playoff pairings were announced. And as we sit here on Wednesday, 3 days before the game, I am almost there, but I am not all the way there. So I have Georgia 42-41. And I have what is that? Is that Stetson Bennett leading a game-winning drive in the final 2 minutes? Is it CJ Stroud's 4th down pass to Marvin Harrison Jr. on 4th and 11 from the 38-yard line being knocked away by Keely Ringo, right? I mean, whatever it is, some version of a tight game that is high scoring, that is take Ohio State with the points, that is take the over, but it's respect for a very well-coached, talented Georgia team that in the end, I think what gets Georgia over the top, Georgia's defense is not as good as last year's Georgia defense. But as you said early on, Georgia's offense is better. And that's what gets Georgia over the top, that Ohio State just can't ever get the stops against Stetson Bennett that they need to try to stretch a lead. And the result is these daggone defending national champs defend it to the bitter end and win by a point.
How does Ohio State ever lose in recruiting? Like, how does every pitch not end with, "Hey, do you want to talk to LeBron James?" Like that would win me over every single time. How does that not happen every single time?
Also, John Legend, big Ohio State
fan.
Yeah,
I forgot he's from Ohio. That's crazy. You got John Legend and LeBron James, and you're losing recruiting battles to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, bro. What is happening?
I think it's what's the thing? Money.
I mean, listen, we're still debating on Twitter whether you'd rather have $100,000 or a dinner with Jay-Z. You can offer a dinner with LeBron James, and that's more than $100,000. Also, why is Ohio State getting beaten with money? They have more money than basically anybody, but that's a whole other conversation for another.
The athletic department has money, yes, but the athletic department can't give the money to the players. So that's the welcome to the NIL world of Ohio State frustration at the moment. So a 1-point win for Georgia. And it's one of those things. I'm not going to claim victory either way. This is not about – I will not be surprised. The only thing that will surprise me is a Georgia blowout. It's like Ohio State not competing. If Ohio State doesn't compete when they're back from the dead, when they're indoors, then it's like, okay, what is the failure here intangibly, emotionally, schematically? What is the failing here that allowed you not even to hang at all with Georgia? That would surprise me. Even the idea of like Ohio State just comes out and is like, this is what we've been waiting for, and they throw it all over the place and they win by 20. That would surprise me less. And this is not a shot at Georgia. That would surprise me less than like Georgia just smothering Ohio State. Because I think if Ohio State throws all over Georgia, I don't think that's a failing of Georgia. I just think that's a tough matchup. They play aggressive in the secondary. They get beat deep a couple times by first-round receivers. And what are you going to do? If Georgia smothers Ohio State, then I think there's some looking in the mirror, because like, then, okay, this is the thing we thought we could do. We got a perfect situation and we didn't compete. But in the end, I think it's back and forth. I think it's a coin flip, and I'd take Ohio State with the points, but I'll take Georgia to win. Where are you?
Yeah, this is interesting. I feel like in any other year, I'd be waiting for, I don't exactly want to use this phrase, but kind of, I'd be waiting for Georgia to get exposed. I'd be waiting for the shoe to drop on Georgia, for this like facade to fall apart. But this is a weird year. There is not a 2020 Alabama. There is not, I don't even think a 2021 Georgia. There's not a 2019 LSU. It's a weird year. And I think that in that kind of year, the team that is able to do the right thing most consistently and make the fewest mistakes will be the team that comes away with these games. And I think that team in this game, by a pretty comfortable margin, is Georgia. I think that Georgia does not make mistakes. I think that they match up well with what Ohio State is trying to do defensively. I think they've got the best tight end pairing since I think I mentioned yesterday, Noah Fant and TJ Hawkinson at Iowa. I think that they're a special team and they run the ball well. They have a good offensive line. And like you said, I think that they have a quarterback in Stetson Bennett who's able to make the right decisions and right plays and accurate plays in the right situations. And so, Ohio State is more dynamic. They're going to have moments where they show that they're clearly more dynamic. Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to have a huge game, I think. But I think that it will come down to who blinks first. I think that team is going to be Ohio State. It's going to be very close. I think Ohio State could end up with more yards than Georgia, but Georgia's just going to be more efficient. They're going to complete their drives. They're going to finish in the red zone. I think this ends up being about 41-31. Very high scoring game, very efficient game, very productive game. I think everybody will walk away from it saying, wow, what a well-played game. But I think that Georgia is just the more complete team. And I think that they're going to be the team that also kind of flashes a little bit of that, I guess you could call it championship DNA, and makes the plays in the moments and completes the drives and just plays well in the middle eight, for example, and just plays winning football in the right situations.
All right, so we'll agree on that one. Both picking Georgia. I'm picking Michigan. Shehan's picking TCU. We will be back early next week for Apple Podcast subscribers, wrapping up these semifinal games. And of course, we'll look ahead to the national title game in Los Angeles. But for now, you still work at CBS, right? Still writing stuff there?
As far as I know, I haven't checked my bank account. I hope that my checks have still been clearing. You
writing any more bowl previews?
Oh boy. Yeah, I did the Alamo Bowl one yesterday. I don't know. I have a bunch. So basically we decide who writes each of these bowl previews before bowl season, but I was going to be gone the entire first half of bowl season. So I have to do like all of mine this week. So it's been quite a week. I kind of alluded to, I'm under the weather. I had to stay up until 1 a.m. to write a recap on the Guaranteed Rate Bowl and hear Mike Gundy complain about stuff. So that was not an easy endeavor given my current condition, but it's bowl season. It's going to be 8 months before we get to watch college football again. So I'm trying to enjoy every second.
I would like to shout out the members of our College Football Survivor Show bowl pool on ESPN.com. We have 80 people in our bowl confidence pool. Lacking Confidence by Ray Welch is leading the way as we speak here on Wednesday afternoon before these afternoon games on Wednesday kick off. Tyler Shoemaker, who was on with me making bowl predictions, is second in that race right now. Tyler Shoemaker is really good at what he does. And the guy in third place, you might know, it's me. I'm actually doing well, picking something for now. I'm in third. Champions of Ireland from Jordan Burgess is in fourth place right now. That could be a reference to Northwestern football. I'm thinking Champions of Ireland, right? I think that Northwestern 1-0 in Europe, 0-11 in America this year. And Samuel Eastwood is in fifth place. So thanks to everybody who joined our bowl pick'em there. We will, of course, have the winner. The winner gets to come on. Yeah, you didn't do it.
Unfortunately, I was not able to do it, but that's probably for the best because if you're curious, I did check my situation because I have had to make picks over at CBS Sports. Some of them took place while I was in India, and I made them in 3 seconds. So to be fair, didn't put the most thought. I believe I'm 4-7-1 right now on bowl picks. So like I would be not doing so hot, not doing all that hot.
No, that's bad. That's pretty bad. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but now I'm back. Now I'm putting thoughts. Now I'm thinking about my picks a little bit more than when I was in, Calcutta, India. And so hopefully that means that I know what I'm talking about. But yeah, look, if TCU wins, then like I'm going to like you said, I should get a parade or something because I just feel like I'm too deep in at this point. I have to pick them.
He's standing up for all of Texas. He's Shehan Jeyarajah. You can read his bowl previews, read his coverage at cbssports.com. And thanks to you guys, as always, for joining us here. I'm Doug Lesmerises. He's Shehan Jeyarajah, and that was the College Football Survivor Show.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.